Hello everyone, welcome back to another tutorial. In our last tutorial, we looked at laying out text on Adobe InDesign. Just the basics, laying out a title, laying out some body, working with what I was calling a moron line. We also looked at things like paragraph styles and character styles and how we can use those to make our layouts easier. And then finally, I showed you how to save and export your files as, say it with me, an Adobe InDesign file and a print PDF. Those are what I need. I know I'm hitting the nail on the head far too many times, but with that, let's switch over to some new learning. Let's talk about adding images to our Adobe InDesign layouts. So if you pull up hopefully what you were following along with for the last tutorial, we can adjust the same thing. If not, I recommend you at least create a new page, throw some text on it, ideally 2 columns of text. That's pretty much the only thing we're going to need from this page. But if you want to make it look pretty, if you want to make it look like the example that I'm going to be posting, then follow along exactly. That's cool by me. So the first thing we're going to do is think to ourselves, man, we really need another photo here. A, it'll break up the design a little bit. But B, our example had a photo filling pretty much this section here, this first column. But for sake of teaching, I'm not going to simply get you to delete this column and then add in a photo. No, we're going to work with what's called text wrap. This is a super important thing in your layouts for the newspaper. It will be something that's kind of the bane of your existence for the next year. I love it. So what I'm going to get you to do is off to the side of your layout, I just want you to build a frame about the same size as this photo here. So I have it about 91 millimeters by 54 millimeters. Really, just make it twice as tall as it is wide. So this frame, I'm then going to add a photo into. The way to add a photo in Adobe InDesign is to make sure your frame is selected, because Adobe InDesign, again, say it with me, works by building frames. You build the frames, then you fill them. That's how InDesign works. That's how it'll always work. Probably. So, to fill the frame, we go to File. We go to Place. And then we find our photo. In the case of this example, I'll be providing you this photo. It's photographer 455747. I just grabbed it from Pixabay. It's royalty-free photo. And it fit the vibe of our magazine for obvious reasons. You'll note that there's nothing inside the frame when it's pulled off to the side. That's because anything that's off screen doesn't show unless we hit W. Once we've hit W and that screen goes kind of darker around the edge and we can see all our frames, now we can see the stuff hidden in the background. Now, this photo looks beautiful, does it not? All pixelated and gigantic. So we need to know how to resize this photo. There's a few ways to do it. I'll show you with the direct selection tool, which is just your normal cursor. I want you to click on the middle of this frame where this little like grayish white circle pops up. And once you've selected that, yeah. With that selected, you should be able to click and drag your photo. Well, that's all well and good, but it's still gigantic and you have no... There we go. If we zoom all the way out to this gigantic photos, we can click and drag the handles however we want, right? Same as you'd edit any photo in pretty much any program ever at this point. That's a pain in the butt. I'm not about to start to drag these down so they perfectly fit inside the frame. It'll look awful. It'll look weird. There's all sorts of tools that Adobe InDesign has given us to make images easier. So clicking off of that for a second, and then clicking back on, not on the circle, just so our frame is selected. Let's right click on the frame and find about halfway down the option Fitting. Fitting fits our photo within our frame in various different ways. So we can fill the frame proportionally, which will shrink our photo to the smallest size possible while still fitting in our image without warping anything. We can fit the content proportionally. We can do a content aware fit, which whatever. We can fit the frame to the content, which makes our frame giant. We can fit the content to the frame without making it proportional. In this case, we're just going to fill the frame proportionally. Oh look, a usable photo. It looks quite nice, and it's in focus. But again, if we click on that center circle, you'll see that there's plenty more photo that isn't being used by our frame. If you want to, click on your frame and adjust the photo, or adjust the frame, you can. Or if, let's say, you wanted a bit more of this side of the camera, a bit less hand in the photo, you can click on that center, and once you have that brown outline, just use the left and right or up and down keys to adjust your photo. I'm going to adjust it just so that little bit of hand left. We want the model number in there. It's not quite centered, but it's basically centered. So clicking off and clicking back on again, not on the circle, we get the blue border. And just to clarify, from this point forward, I'm going to say click on the frame or click on the photo. When I say click on the frame, I mean click on it so that you get this. Just the frame selected, the blue border, If I say click on the photo, I mean click on the center circle, revealing the full photo. Just to make things easier. So let's click on the frame. Now we can move the frame in. So we want the frame in about that space. Now, come on, let's adjust that to be centered. There we go. You'll note that our photo frame isn't quite as wide as we want it to be. So let's just quick make that adjustment by clicking on the frame, dragging the frame over. There we go, just that easy. So next up, we have, let me just adjust the bottom of the frame too, so it lines up with the moron line. Next up, we have the issue of our entire paragraph, or our entire column of text has just vanished. It hasn't actually vanished, it's just behind our photo frame. This is where text wrapping helps. It can also severely hurt, because with this photo selected, or the photo's frame selected, we're going to go to this icon here. It looks like an egg inside a bunch of horizontal lines. It's the sixth option down. It is text wrap. Currently, our square image is underneath a bunch of lines, which means there is no text wrap at all. Our image and our text will not interact in any way. They'll just be in the same place, which is either your photo's covering your text or your text is written over your photo, which I'll show you right now. That should be good. Yeah. So text written over the photo, not a great look. So our photo frame is still selected. We can click on this first option here, which is wraparound bounding box. And what that does is it gets rid of all the text that's within the box that is our photo. So if I were to do this, our text, any text, is going to move to adjust to show the photo. And this is a really awesome tool because it means you can build a 2-column full page layout and throw a photo right nice in the middle, and you don't have to worry about cutting out the text area. It just automatically does it for you. The downside with this is it pushes all your text, and it pushes it like a bully pushes a kid on the playground. It's brutal with it. So, there are things we have to consider. First of all, we have this idea of a bounding box. So, bear with me because there's 3 layers of thought here. We have our photo, which is the big brown rectangle. We have the frame for our photo. Pardon me. There we go. Which is kind of like the window we cut out to show part of the photo. And then finally we have a bounding box, which currently you don't see because it's all set to 0 millimeters here. But if I bump it up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 millimeters, you now see this white line outside. And that's kind of the margin around this photo. Because if we don't have it, then, albeit I wouldn't actually put the photo here, you'll see that all this text is hugging right up against our photo. And that's not something we normally like the look of. Sometimes you can have that. Sometimes it's intentional. In this case, it's not. And so I'm going to adjust my bounding box a little bit. Just a millimeter. And if you click on this little chain here, you can adjust specific parts of the bounding box, like top or bottom. This is useful for if you're doing things like photo captions. Now, again, normally I'd have just told you guys to get rid of this first column of text and put a photo in, but I couldn't give up the opportunity to show you how to work with word wrap. So in this case, our photo is just going to shove all the text over, and like in last tutorial where I showed you what overset text looks like, when we right click on that, the text frame, click edit in story editor, we have all this text that was pushed back. Again, if the article were words that we cared about, we would have to try to find a way to make them fit. In this case, it's all placeholders, so we can just delete them. It doesn't look great here because of the 2 words and the more on page 8, but I'm not too worried about it. This is just a dummy layout. So there's other things we can do with our images to make them look a little bit better. For example, there we go. You'll note that around my black and white photo here, I have just the tiniest black border to help it pop. Well, I can add the same thing to this guy. So I'll click on the frame, and then rather than going to stroke options on the side, up top we have our color options here, and then this line which indicates our stroke options. I'm just going to press up on the thing above it, which created a 1-point stroke around our image. It also filled this stroke color square in with black because that's the default that we are set to. Ultimately, if we want to, we can change up that color. I'm going to leave it on black. You can do whatever you want. But that's one way to just make our images pop. It's not necessary, but it tends to look good. So let's consider our next graphic options with lines. Lines can do all sorts of things for a design. For example, if I take my cover, and just there we go, and we will, and we'll just hide them. Yeah, well, rather than keep spending time on this, the idea is that this design, if we didn't add lines to it, is a nice photo, but really doesn't give us that doesn't give us that feeling of a magazine cover. There we go. Let's move that up there. There we go. So that's all well and good But once we add in these graphics we add in a bit of text, but we'll also add in a whole bunch of lines, we're suddenly given a bit more of a dynamic layout. And we can play with those lines just like we can play with the lines I'm about to show you. I'm showing you particularly straight lines, but it's the same for shapes. So let's draw in some lines for our article. There's a really roundabout way to get to that point. So what I'm going to do is use the line tool, click, and drag, and if I hold shift, the line will fit. It will automatically fall on a 45-degree angle, or not, like straight or on 45-degree angle. So there we go. With that line selected, I can do all sorts of things to adjust it. I can make it thicker with the stroke options up top. Or if I pull open stroke here, I can do things like add rounded caps to it, which let's make it a bit bigger for sake of the example. Rather than flat ends, we have this nice rounding. In lines or shapes that are polygons like squares or circles, we can have joins and alignment of stroke. We can change up the type of stroke that we're working with. Rather than having to draw in these individual lines, we can just do a custom line. We can even add bars or squares or arrows to our lines. These tools just make it easier to design something that anyone who spends a bit of time practicing on this program will learn how to do these things on their own. This program just makes it easier. So in the case of our article lines, we're using one point lines. And rather than draw a second, I'm just going to Control C to copy. And rather than Control V, which gives us a line in a random place, I'm going to do Control Alt Shift V. It's a hard one to just keep repeating that one to yourself. And it seems like no line appeared, but in fact a line appeared exactly where the other was, which means it's in perfect alignment if I just press the down arrow and move it down. There we go. We could do the same on the bottom of our piece with a thicker line, but really that's about it. In our next tutorial where I show you, well, really I'll just walk through laying out a poster, much like one you will have to do for your poster assignment. I'm going to walk you through laying one out, and in that I'm going to get a bit more into the graphics of this program. Spoiler alert, a lot of the graphics in this program are just moving into Photoshop and editing there, but there's still a lot this program can do for that kind of thing. So with that, that's how we throw in a basic image. I suppose the only other thing to remember is that frames don't have to be squares. Things don't have to be in this grid format. We'll talk about this more in class, but just real quick, if I draw a circle, hit W, and then place an image in there, I'll just use this random one. It works. Like there's so much we can do here that isn't just boring squares. So don't feel like just because of this tutorial you have to work in a basic grid layout. You do you mix things up in a way that works for you. So with that, thank you for watching this tutorial. I'll be back with the next one in a little bit of time, where we'll look at laying out a basic poster. So have yourselves a good one.